I accept your challenge. 4 words that should have ended in bloodshed. Instead, the Alpha King's lethal smile faltered as Rowan Wildhart stood unflinching in the center of the great hall, her battle-scarred armor a defiant white against the sea of glittering nobles. The entire pack assembly, 600 of the realm's most powerful wolves, held its breath, because challenges to Alpha King Kieran Nightshade always ended one way, with the challenger's corpse cooling on ancient marble. But 3 hours later, as the most feared ruler in werewolf history collapsed to his knees in defeat, his proud head bowed before a rogue warrior everyone had dismissed as dead. Every witness understood they'd just seen the old world shatter, and something new, something dangerous, something necessary, claw its way into existence. The Alpha King had never lost. Not in 300 years of absolute rule, not in 500 brutal battles across 3 continents, not once in the countless challenges from ambitious alphas who thought youth and aggression could topple experience. Until a ghost wearing her clan's colors invoked magic he'd forgotten existed, and truth became more powerful than any blade. What happens when the most powerful alpha in history discovers that his greatest victory was built on lies? Watch as a king who's never knelt is forced to his knees by ancient magic that judges not strength, but righteousness. Stay until the end, because the revelation of who truly betrayed the Wildhart clan will expose a conspiracy that reaches into the very heart of the throne. And the warrior who brings the king to his knees might be the only one who can save his crumbling kingdom from the traitor hiding in plain sight. The great hall of the Royal Summit towers like a cathedral to wolf supremacy. A massive stone chamber where intricate banners from every pack in the realm hang from vaulted ceilings, their colors bright against ancient gray walls carved with the history of shifter wars and treaties. Long feast tables groan under roasted meats, winter vegetables, and flagons of honeyed mead, the celebration of another year of Kieran Nightshade's unchallenged reign in full swing. Hundreds of candles cast dancing shadows across the faces of nobles draped in furs and jewels, while winter roses, pink, white, and deep crimson, perfume the air with their dying sweetness. At the hall's far end, elevated on a stone dais worn smooth by centuries of rulers, sits an ancient throne of dark wood and silver, and upon it, Alpha King Kieran Nightshade himself. Dark hair falling in waves past his shoulders, strong features set in the confidence of one who's never known defeat, elaborate ceremonial armor worked with intricate designs that catch the light like captured lightning. His presence dominates the space even in stillness, 300 years of authority made manifest. Beside him stands Declan Stormbringer, his beta and oldest friend, silver-haired and watchful, while throughout the crowd, other notables cluster, Lady Morrigan Darkwood among them, her beauty cold as winter frost, her smile never quite reaching calculating eyes. Into this celebration of power strides Rowan Wildhart, and the very air seems to crack with the impossibility of her existence. Platinum blonde hair rises in an intricate crown of warrior braids, each weave a traditional style of the clan everyone believed massacred 5 years past. Her skin holds the pallor of someone who survived what should have killed her, and her eyes, ice blue and burning with purpose, sweep across the assembled packs without fear, without plea, without the deference every wolf in this room shows the throne. She wears white ceremonial fur, over battle-worn leather armor. And emblazoned across her chest, in silver thread, sits the Wildhart symbol, a great tree with roots deep and branches reaching, the tree of life that once represented one of the realm's most honored bloodlines. Scars mark her exposed arms, claw marks, blade cuts, burn tissue, a roadmap of survival that should have broken her, but somehow forged her into something harder than the nobles in their pristine finery. She doesn't approach the dais like a supplicant. She walks like a warrior entering an arena, and every instinct in the room screams danger. Rowan stops in the center of the hall, precisely where the ancient wolf laws dictate challengers must stand, and her voice rings out clear and cold enough to shatter the warmth of celebration like glass. Alpha King Kieran Nightshade, I invoke the ancient covenant. The hall plunges into shocked silence. The ancient covenant, trial by combat bound by magic older than any living wolf, where truth and justice weigh heavier than strength, where victory goes not to the powerful, but to the righteous. It hasn't been invoked in 2 centuries, since before most of these nobles were born. I challenge you for justice denied, for lands stolen under false testimony, for the honor of my slaughtered clan, and for the truth of who orchestrated their destruction. Her hand rests on the pommel of a sword that's seen real use, not ceremonial decoration. Trial by combat, judged by the Covenant's magic, witnessed by all packs. When I win, you will return Wildhart territories, investigate the conspiracy that murdered my people, and expose the traitor who fed you lies. Kieran rises from his throne with predatory grace, his smile sharp enough to draw blood. A rogue warrior, alone and outmatched, invoking ancient magic as if it could protect her from him. He's faced down rebellions, conquered rival packs, and held absolute power for 3 centuries. This will be over in minutes. I accept your challenge. The moment those words leave his lips, ancient magic seals around them both, invisible chains of covenant law that will hold them to this contest until truth emerges or one of them dies. Kieran descends from the dais, already reaching for his blade, while Declan's face goes pale with sudden, inexplicable dread. Neither the king nor his challenger knows that before the night ends, truth will prove more devastating than any weapon, and that sometimes the most important battles are the ones that bring you to your knees. The Grand Summit feast had reached that perfect crescendo of revelry, where wine flowed freely and alliances were forged over roasted venison. Alpha King Kieran Nightshade raised his goblet to toast another year of unified peace under his rule, the assembled packs roaring their approval, when the massive oak doors of the great hall slammed open with a boom that silenced 600 voices mid-cheer. She stood framed in the doorway like a ghost made flesh, and Kieran's hand froze halfway to his lips. White fur and battle-worn leather. Platinum hair braided in the old style. The tree of life emblazoned across her chest in silver that caught torchlight and threw it back like a challenge. Impossible. The Wildhart clan had been eliminated 5 years ago. A justified action against traitors plotting rebellion. Kieran had signed the execution order himself based on irrefutable intelligence from his most trusted advisors. Every man, woman, and child accounted for in the final reports. Yet here walked proof that something had survived, and the way she moved through the suddenly parting crowd suggested it wasn't mercy that had spared her, but sheer stubborn refusal to die. Alpha King Kieran Nightshade, Her voice carried across the hall with the clarity of a blade drawn from its sheath. She stopped in the center of the ancient challenge circle, worn stones where generations of wolves had settled disputes under the old laws. I am Rowan Wildhart, last daughter of House Wildhart, sole survivor of the massacre you ordered based on lies and fabricated treason. Murmurs rippled through the assembly like wind through wheat. Beside Kieran, Declan Stormbringer shifted uneasily, his warrior's instincts clearly screaming warnings his king couldn't yet hear. Across the hall, Lady Morrigan Darkwood had gone perfectly still, her wine goblet suspended halfway to her painted lips, her expression unreadable. I invoke the ancient covenant, Rowan continued, her ice-blue eyes locked on Kieran's with an intensity that should have withered under his rank, but somehow didn't. Trial by combat, bound by the magic of truth and righteousness. I challenge you for justice denied, for lands stolen, for honor destroyed, and for the exposure of the conspiracy that murdered my family under the banner of your authority. The hall erupted. Wolves leaped to their feet, some in outrage, others in excitement, many simply in shock. The ancient covenant hadn't been invoked since before most of them were born, a relic of the old times when magic still bound wolf law to something deeper than politics and power. It was trial by combat, yes, but with ancient enchantment woven through it. The magic didn't judge strength alone, but the weight of truth behind each combatant's cause. Victory went to the righteous, not merely the powerful. Kieran set down his goblet with deliberate care and rose from his throne, descending the dais steps with the fluid grace of a predator who'd never known defeat. 300 years of challenges, and not one challenger had walked away. This slip of a girl, this remnant of a dead house, thought ancient magic would save her from his claws? You invoke the covenant for a trial you cannot win, he said, his voice carrying that edge of amused menace that had preceded so many quick executions. Your clan was destroyed because they plotted against the crown. The evidence was clear, the judgment just. If you truly believe otherwise, I accept your challenge, and I'll grant you the mercy of a quick death when you inevitably yield. My lord, Declan's voice was low, urgent, meant only for Kieran's ears as the king passed. Something about this feels wrong. The covenant hasn't been invoked in 2 centuries for good reason. The magic is unpredictable, and she wouldn't risk it unless she's desperate and foolish, Kieran cut him off, though not unkindly. Declan had been his friend and advisor for over a century, had earned the right to speak freely. She watched her family die and spent 5 years nursing vengeance until it poisoned her judgment. I've seen it before. The Covenant's magic will find the truth, that House Wildhart's treason was real, my justice was righteous, and she dies for nothing. And if she's right, Declan pressed, his silver-streaked hair catching firelight as he moved to block Kieran's path. If the evidence was false, the Covenant's magic will prove what I already know, Kieran said with absolute certainty, stepping around his beta. He'd ruled for 3 centuries precisely because he never acted on false intelligence, never signed death warrants without proof. The Wildhart execution had been one of many necessary actions to maintain stability. Painful, yes, but justified. The Covenant would confirm this, and then perhaps the realm would finally stop romanticizing the fallen house. He strode toward the challenge circle where Rowan waited with a warrior's stillness, her hand resting on a sword pommel worn smooth by use. Around them, The assembly was already clearing space, pushing back tables, forming the traditional witness ring. The Moon Priestess emerged from the crowd, ancient and bent, her blind eyes somehow finding both challengers unerringly. "The ancient covenant is invoked," she intoned, her voice creaking like old leather. "Blood and truth, blade and righteousness, bound until one yields or dies. The magic will judge. The magic will know." Kieran drew his sword, dark steel that had tasted the blood of kings and rebels alike, and smiled that predator's smile that had been the last thing so many challengers ever saw. "I accept your challenge, Rowan Wildhart. May the covenant show mercy to your memory, because I will not." As the words left his mouth, something ancient and vast settled over the hall like an invisible weight, and Declan Stormbringer closed his eyes in dread, knowing with absolute certainty that his king had just made a terrible mistake. The Moon Priestess moved to the center of the challenge circle, with steps that defied her apparent age, her ceremonial robes whispering across stone, worn smooth by centuries of such rituals. She carried a silver bowl filled with water, drawn from the sacred spring beneath the citadel, water that had never seen sunlight, touched only by moonlight and ancient enchantment. The blind seer's milky eyes seemed to look through both Kieran and Rowan, seeing not flesh, but the truth of their intentions, the weight of their causes. "The ancient covenant is more than combat," she began, her voice suddenly strong and resonant, filling every corner of the vast hall. "It is judgment made manifest. Magic older than the throne itself will bind you both, not just to this fight, but to its outcome. There can be no escape once sealed, no mercy from the magic itself. It will weigh your truth against steel, your righteousness against strength, and when blood is spilled, it will know which cause is just." She dipped gnarled fingers into the silver bowl and approached Kieran first. He knelt without hesitation. He'd participated in covenant rituals before, though never as a combatant. The cold water traced a line across his forehead, and he felt the magic take hold immediately, invisible chains settling around his chest, not restraining but binding him to this moment, to this challenge, to whatever outcome the ancient enchantment deemed true. "Alpha King Kieran Nightshade," the priestess intoned, "you fight for the righteousness of your judgment, for the justice of your rule, for the authority of your throne. The covenant hears your claim. The covenant will judge." She turned to Rowan, who knelt with the same steady grace, no tremor in her warrior's frame despite facing near certain death. The water marked her pale forehead, and Kieran saw her eyes close briefly as the magic settled over her like a second skin. "Rowan Wildhart, last daughter of a fallen house, you fight for justice denied, for truth obscured, for honor destroyed. The covenant hears your claim. The covenant will judge." The priestess poured the remaining water onto the ancient stones between them, and where it splashed, symbols glowed briefly with silver light, the old wolf runes for truth, justice, blood, and binding. The magic crystallized in the air, thick enough that even the youngest wolf present could feel its weight pressing down on the hall. "The terms are set by ancient law," the Moon Priestess declared, her blind gaze sweeping across the assembled witnesses. "No interference from any wolf on pain of death, no weapons save those carried by the combatants. The fight continues until one yields in words spoken clearly, or until death claims the defeated. Should the Alpha King fall or yield, the challenger's demands must be honored in full by the throne. Should the challenger fall or yield, Her life and cause are forfeit to the king's justice. She raised both withered hands. Let all present witness. Let none interfere. Let truth be revealed through blood and blade. The ancient covenant is sealed. The magic surged outward like a silent explosion, and every wolf in the hall felt it pass through them, a reminder that they were bound now too, bound to witness, bound to accept whatever truth emerged from this circle. Rowan rose first, her hand moving to draw her sword with practiced ease. The weapon that emerged from its worn sheath was beautiful in its brutal simplicity, slightly curved, single-edged, the steel bearing the distinctive wave pattern of Wildhart, forging techniques thought lost with the clan's destruction. She held it in a two-handed grip, her stance shifting into something Kieran didn't immediately recognize. 5 years, she said quietly, though her voice carried in the charged silence. 5 years hiding in the northern wastes, hunting for survival, training until my hands bled and my muscles screamed. 5 years studying the old texts, the forbidden scrolls, mastering the techniques my father only began to teach me before you had him cut down in his own hall. She moved through a quick sequence, flowing motions that were distinctly Wildhart style, a combat form that emphasized speed and precision, over raw power, developed centuries ago by a clan that had never produced the largest warriors, but consistently produced the deadliest. Kieran felt a flicker of something he refused to name as unease. That fighting style was supposed to be extinct, its masters all dead, its secrets burned with the Wildhart archives. I didn't come here to die, Alpha King, Rowan continued, settling back into her ready stance. I came here to expose the truth, to reclaim what was stolen, and to prove that your justice was built on lies. The Covenant will show everyone what really happened to my clan, and why. Around them, the witness circle was forming as nobles and warriors pushed back the heavy feast tables with scraping efficiency, clearing the ancient challenge ground. 600 wolves arranged themselves in concentric rings, the most powerful alphas closest to the circle's edge, lesser ranks behind them, all pressed together in breathless anticipation. Servants extinguished half the candles, leaving the arena in dramatic half-light where shadows would make reading attacks more difficult, traditional for Covenant trials, where even lighting was meant to be impartial. Kieran drew his own blade, a long sword that had served him for 2 centuries, perfectly balanced, its edge sharp enough to split falling silk. He rolled his shoulders, feeling ancient muscles remember countless battles, and regarded Rowan with newfound interest. She'd trained for 5 years, specifically to face him. She'd mastered a supposedly extinct fighting style. She'd invoked Covenant magic that would judge truth, not just strength. Either she was supremely confident in her cause, or supremely insane. No interference, Kieran called out, his voice carrying to every witness. No mercy. When she yields, it ends. When I win, her accusations die with her cause. And we speak no more of the Wildhart traitors. Declan stood at the circle's edge, his weathered face tight with concern, but he nodded. The law was clear. The Covenant was sealed. Whatever happened now, it would happen without intervention. The Moon Priestess raised one hand. The ancient Covenant is witnessed. Let combat begin. She dropped her hand, and Kieran surged forward with 3 centuries of killing experience behind every movement, expecting this to be over in moments. He couldn't have been more wrong. Kieran's opening strike came like thunder, a diagonal slash meant to test defenses and end battles. before they truly began. 300 years of combat had taught him to read opponents in their first response, to know within seconds whether they deserved a warrior's death or a quick execution. Rowan's blade met his with a sharp ring of steel that sent vibrations up both their arms, but she didn't try to match his strength. Instead, she redirected, letting his momentum carry past her as she spun away, the Wildhart style's signature flowing evasion making her appear to dance rather than fight. Interesting. But not enough. Kieran pressed the attack with methodical brutality, each strike calculated to drive her back, to corner her, to eliminate the space she needed for those evasive movements. His blade carved through the air where she'd been a heartbeat before, forcing her into increasingly desperate defenses. He was stronger, faster despite his size, and infinitely more experienced. This was mathematics, not magic. Simple calculation of superior skill, overwhelming inferior preparation. His sword found her shoulder, splitting leather and drawing first blood. A shallow cut, barely more than a scratch, but proof of the inevitable outcome. Rowan hissed but didn't yield, spinning away to put distance between them. "First blood to the king," someone in the crowd shouted, and approving murmurs rippled through the witness circle. Kieran allowed himself a cold smile. "Yield now, and I'll make it quick. The Covenant will accept a spoken surrender." "Not yet," Rowan breathed, resetting her stance despite the blood trailing down her arm. Her eyes held no fear, only fierce concentration, as if she were solving an equation rather than fighting for her life. He came at her again, this time targeting her wounded side, expecting her defenses to weaken. Instead, she did something unexpected. She attacked into his attack, her curved blade suddenly inside his guard, forcing him to abort his strike and backstep. The move cost her. His pommel caught her ribs as he retreated, a bone-bruising impact that staggered her. But she'd turned his aggression against him, the Wildhart style. He remembered now from old histories. They never retreated when pressed. They found angles where retreat became attack, where defense transformed into offense, slippery and dangerous, like fighting smoke given steel. For the next several minutes, Kieran dominated through pure experience, landing strikes that accumulated across Rowan's arms, her legs, her torso. Each one drew blood. Each one should have weakened her. Each one should have convinced her to yield. She staggered, stumbled, gasped with pain. But every time he expected her to fall, she rose again, her blade still moving with that maddening precision. Blood soaked through her white fur, turning it crimson. Her breathing came ragged. Yet somehow, impossibly, she kept finding angles he didn't expect, kept forcing him to adjust his attacks, kept refusing to break. The crowd's cheering had faded to tense silence. This should have been over by now. The Alpha King had never needed more than minutes to defeat challengers, yet here they remained, circling each other in the candlelit arena, both bleeding now, though admittedly her wounds far outnumbered his scratches. Kieran felt the first stirrings of frustration. Not concern, he was still clearly winning, but irritation that she refused to acknowledge the obvious. "How many wounds before you admit defeat?" he growled, feinting left and striking right, his blade opening a gash across her thigh that made her stumble. She caught herself on one knee, breathing hard, her pale hair falling loose from its braids and sticking to her bloodied face. For a moment, he thought she'd finally yield. Then she looked up, and the expression in her ice-blue eyes stopped him cold. Not defeat, not even close. Something else entirely. Recognition. As if she'd been studying him, learning him, waiting for precisely this moment. Now, she whispered. She exploded upward with speed that shouldn't have been possible from someone that wounded, her curved blade following a trajectory he'd never seen before. The legendary Wildhart technique called the Rising Moon, banned from formal combat 2 centuries ago for being too lethal, too difficult to defend against because it violated every conventional angle of attack. Kieran's instincts screamed. He twisted, brought his sword up to block, but she'd already anticipated the defense, her blade redirecting mid-strike with a wrist movement so subtle he barely saw it. Cold fire traced across his cheek as her edge kissed his skin, a shallow cut from cheekbone to jaw that burned like acid. The hall went absolutely silent. Kieran's free hand came up to his face, fingers coming away red with his own blood. His blood. The Alpha King's blood, spilled in honorable combat for the first time in decades. Around them, 600 wolves stared in shocked disbelief. Some had never seen their king bleed. Most had never imagined it possible. Rowan backed away 3 steps, resetting her stance despite her trembling legs and the blood loss that should have rendered her unconscious. She was running on pure will now, and they both knew it, but she'd done what she came to do. She'd proven she wasn't just some revenge-mad girl with a death wish. She was a warrior who could wound a king. Declan's voice carried from the witness circle, tight with something that might have been pride or might have been dread. First blood to the challenger. The murmurs started then, uncertain, questioning. Not that anyone doubted Kieran would still win, but the absolute certainty had cracked. And in that crack, doubt began to grow like frost, spreading across glass. Kieran lowered his hand, feeling the warm trickle of blood down his neck, and for the first time in 3 centuries of rule, he looked at an opponent and thought, this might actually be difficult. The Covenant's magic pulsed through the air like a second heartbeat, as if the ancient enchantment were paying very close attention now. No more testing, Kieran said quietly, his voice carrying a new edge, not anger, but respect for a worthy opponent. No more mercy. He raised his sword with both hands, settling into the killing stance that had ended rebellions and conquered kingdoms. And across from him, bleeding from a dozen wounds but still standing, Rowan Wildhart smiled like she'd been waiting for precisely this moment all along. Steel rang against steel in a rhythm that had become almost hypnotic. Strike, parry, counter, retreat. Kieran and Rowan circled each other like celestial bodies locked in orbit, neither able to break away, neither willing to yield. Blood slicked the ancient stones beneath their feet, making footing treacherous. Both warriors bore wounds now, though Kieran's remained superficial, while Rowan's accumulated injuries should have felled anyone with less will. They clashed again in the center of the circle, blades locked, faces inches apart. Kieran could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her arms trembled with effort. She was running on fumes and determination. Minutes more and her body would simply give out. "Why won't you yield?" he demanded, genuinely curious now. "You've proven your courage. No one could call you coward. Yield with honor." "Because," Rowan gasped, her breath hot against his face, "the truth hasn't been revealed yet." Before he could question what she meant, a commotion erupted at the witness circle's edge. Declan Stormbringer's voice rang out with an authority that made even battling warriors pause. "Stop! My king, you must stop!" The Covenant's magic shimmered, but didn't break. The combat could only end through yield or death, not interruption. Yet Kieran and Rowan both stepped back by unspoken agreement, their blades lowering slightly as they turned toward the beta. Declan stood at the circle's boundary, and in his hands he held a leather satchel stuffed with documents. His weathered face was pale, his expression that of a man who'd discovered something that would change everything. Behind him stood 3 wolves. Kieran didn't immediately recognize, common-born by their dress, their faces marked by hardship and fear. "Speak quickly," Kieran commanded, his chest heaving. "The Covenant demands we finish this." "That's exactly why I must speak now," Declan replied, his voice carrying to every witness. "My king, 3 months ago, something about the Wildhart massacre began troubling me. Small inconsistencies in the reports, details that didn't align. So I investigated, quietly, carefully." He held up the satchel. "What I found will damn us all if we don't expose it now." He pulled out the first document, an intelligence report bearing official seals. "This is the original report that condemned House Wildhart. It claims they were amassing weapons, meeting with enemy packs, planning rebellion. It's signed by Lady Morrigan Darkwood, your chief advisor at the time." He held up a second document. "This is the actual patrol report from that same period. No weapons stockpiles, no suspicious meetings, nothing but a mining clan working their ancestral lands." A ripple of shock went through the assembly. All eyes turned toward Morrigan, who stood perfectly still in the crowd, her beautiful face an unreadable mask. "Lies," she said calmly. "The beta has been deceived by forged documents. Obviously, the Wildhart girl arranged this to save herself." "Then explain these," Declan shot back, pulling out more papers. "Bank records showing massive payments from your personal accounts to the patrol captains who filed the false reports. All of them conveniently dead now, killed in training accidents within months of the Wildhart execution." He held up a map. "Land deeds transferring Wildhart mining territories to shell companies, all of which trace back to your holdings." Kieran's blood ran cold. His hand tightened and his sword hilt as his mind raced through implications. What motive would justify such elaborate deception? "The Wildhart lands sit atop the largest deposit of moonstone in the realm," Rowan's voice cut through the hall, rough but clear. "Rare magical minerals worth fortunes. My father discovered the deposits 2 months before your people came for us. He was preparing to offer the crown first rights to mining in exchange for royal protection of the territory. But if the crown seized the lands through justified execution," Declan continued grimly, "and those lands were then quietly transferred to private ownership." He let the implication hang. "This is absurd." Morrigan's voice remained steady, but Kieran noticed her hand had moved to rest on something hidden in her robes. The Alpha King would never believe such transparent manipulation. "I would speak." One of the common-born wolves behind Declan stepped forward, his voice shaking but determined. I was Captain Aldrich Stonepaw. I led the patrol that first reported on House Wildhart. Lady Morrigan approached me with gold and threats. She told me what to write. She said the king needed justification to move against the Wildharts, that they were secretly troublesome. His voice broke. I wrote lies because she promised my family would die if I didn't. And then she tried to kill me anyway. I've been hiding in the outer territories for 5 years. A second wolf stepped forward, a woman with a scarred face. I was a servant in Morrigan's household. I saw the original patrol reports before she altered them. When I tried to speak up, her assassins came for me. I barely escaped. The third witness, an elderly wolf with a clerk's ink-stained fingers, spoke quietly. I processed the land transfers. I knew something was wrong, but Lady Morrigan assured me it was the king's will. I've carried this guilt for 5 years, and I cannot stay silent anymore. The hall erupted in chaos, nobles shouting, questions, accusations flying, the carefully maintained order of the summit dissolving into turmoil. Through it all, Kieran stood frozen in the challenge circle, his mind reeling. He'd ordered the execution of an entire clan, men, women, children, based on fabricated evidence. He'd signed death warrants for innocents while his trusted advisor profited from their slaughter. The justice he'd been so certain of, the righteousness that should have given him covenant victory, was built on lies and corruption. And Rowan had known. She'd invoked the covenant because she knew the truth would emerge, knew the magic would respond to genuine injustice. The covenant's invisible weight pressed down harder, and for the first time, Kieran felt it not as binding, but as judgment. Ancient magic recognizing that the wrong warrior had been defending a righteous cause. His knees suddenly felt weak, not from exhaustion, from the crushing weight of what he'd done. Across the circle, Rowan lowered hers, blade completely, her ice blue eyes locked on his. She wasn't gloating. She looked sad, as if exposing this truth hurt her as much as it hurt him. "The covenant knows," she said softly. "Do you feel it, Alpha King? The magic is choosing." And Kieran did feel it, the ancient enchantment shifting, turning, its weight pressing down on him like judgment made manifest. Kieran's world had narrowed to a single devastating truth. He'd been wrong. 300 years of careful judgment, of weighing evidence, of ensuring justice before action, all undermined by a trusted advisor's greed. The weight of that realization crashed over him like an avalanche, and in the heartbeat where his certainty crumbled, Rowan attacked. Her blade came low and fast, the Wildhart style, exploiting his momentary distraction with ruthless efficiency. He barely got his sword down in time, the impact jarring his already weakened grip. She flowed into the next strike without pause, and suddenly he was retreating, defending, his footwork struggling to keep pace with her renewed aggression. The wound on his cheek burned. His ribs ached where she'd landed a pommel strike earlier. For the first time in 2 centuries of combat, Kieran felt something he'd almost forgotten, the genuine possibility of defeat. "My sister was 7 years old," Rowan's voice came between strikes, each word punctuated by steel meeting steel. Her name was Lissa. She loved winter roses and wanted to be a healer. Strike, parry, counter. "Your soldiers found her hiding in the root cellar with our mother." Kieran blocked desperately, his superior strength the only thing keeping her blade from his throat. "I didn't know. They killed them anyway." Her curved blade wove patterns he couldn't predict, forcing him to give ground he'd never yielded before. "Because your orders were clear, no survivors. Complete the execution. Eliminate the threat." She spun inside his guard, her elbow catching his jaw. Stars exploded across his vision. "What threat, Alpha King? What threat was a 7-year-old child. He staggered back, tasting blood. His blood. More of it now. Around them, the witness circle had gone deathly silent. 600 wolves watching their invincible king struggle against a wounded rogue who should have been dead 10 times over. My father tried to surrender, Rowan continued, pressing forward with controlled fury that was somehow more terrifying than rage. He called for parley, offered to submit to your justice, begged only that you spare the children. Your commander told him traitors deserved no mercy. Their blades locked again, and this time, when Kieran looked into her eyes, he saw past the warrior to the traumatized survivor beneath, someone who'd watched everyone she loved die for crimes they didn't commit. My twin brothers were 14, she gasped, her exhaustion matching his now. Both of them were running on pure will, their bodies screaming for respite. Derek and Finn. They died, defending the Elders' Hall, still believing their Alpha King would arrive and stop the slaughter once he realized the mistake. She broke the lock and spun away, her blade trailing blood, his blood, from a cut across his forearm he hadn't even felt land. When had she gotten that strike through? When had his defenses become porous enough for her to slip past? The Covenant's magic pulsed around them like a living thing, and Kieran felt it judging him with every heartbeat. Not judging his combat skill, that remained superior, barely, but judging the righteousness of his cause, and finding it wanting. They clashed again in the center of the circle, both bleeding, both exhausted, both pushed beyond what should have been their limits. But something had shifted. Where before Kieran had dominated through experience and power, now they were equal. His centuries of skill matched against her 5 years of dedicated preparation. His raw strength matched against her technical precision. His pride matched against her justice. I was 16, Rowan said quietly, their blades trembling between them with the force of their locked struggle. I survived because my father threw me into the hidden passage beneath our hall and sealed it shut. I listened to my family die above me. I heard my mother's last scream, my sister calling for help that never came, my brothers fighting until the end. Kieran's arms shook from exertion, from the Covenant's weight, from the crushing guilt of what his blindness had wrought. If I had known, but you didn't know, she snarled, breaking away and attacking with renewed ferocity that sent him reeling backward. You didn't question, didn't investigate, didn't even grant my father the courtesy of answering his requests for audience. You trusted Morrigan's word and signed our death warrant without a second thought. He blocked desperately, his technique growing sloppy as exhaustion and emotional turmoil eroded his legendary control. She was right. He'd been so secure in his authority, so confident in his advisors, that he'd stopped doing the hard work of verification. He'd become the thing he'd always despised, a ruler who dealt in assumptions rather than truth. I spent 5 years preparing for this moment, Rowan continued, her strikes coming with mechanical precision despite her obvious pain. Learning to fight well enough to challenge you, gathering evidence, finding witnesses, all so I could stand here and force you to face what you did. Their blades met again, but this time neither could push the other back. They stood locked, trembling, two warriors pushed to absolute limits. The Covenant will judge, she whispered, her ice-blue eyes boring into his. Not your strength, not your skill, your truth against mine, your justice against my innocence. And we both know which one the magic will choose. Kieran felt it then, the ancient enchantment's weight pressing down specifically on him, responding to the exposure of injustice, to the revelation that his victory would be built on the blood of innocence. His knees wanted to buckle. His pride screamed to fight harder. His conscience whispered that perhaps losing was exactly what justice demanded. Around them, the assembly watched in breathless silence as the Alpha King and the rogue warrior stood locked in perfect, terrible equilibrium, neither able to defeat the other, both bleeding, both exhausted, both waiting for the Covenant's magic to tip the scales toward truth. And in the shadows at the circle's edge, Lady Morrigan Darkwood's hand tightened around the poisoned blade hidden in her robes, her beautiful face twisting into something ugly as she realized her carefully constructed empire was about to crumble. The poisoned blade left Morrigan's hand in a blur of dark steel and darker magic, spinning end over end toward Declan's exposed back. The beta never saw it coming, his attention fixed on the documents in his hands, on the evidence that had finally condemned the traitor in their midst. But Kieran saw. 3 centuries of battlefield instincts screamed warning even through his exhaustion, and he twisted toward the threat, mouth opening to shout. The knife stopped mid-air, caught in a web of shimmering silver light as the moon priestess raised one withered hand. The ancient seer's blind eyes somehow tracked the weapon perfectly, her voice cracking like breaking stone. Forbidden magic, blood magic, the taint of it stains this hall. Morrigan's beautiful mask shattered, her face contorted with rage and something darker, the desperate fury of a predator backed into a corner. Blind old fool, you should have stayed out of this, she mewed with speed that shocked everyone, her form blurring as she unleashed power she'd been hiding for years. Dark energy crackled around her hands, not the clean magic of wolf shifters, but something corrupt, something that reeked of forbidden rituals and sacrificed lives. She hurled it at the moon priestess in a wave of shadow that made the very air scream. The elderly seer's protective magic shattered like glass. She flew backward, her frail body hitting the stone floor with a sickening crack, her staff clattering away. The Covenant's magic flickered, its ancient bindings wavering as the ritual's anchor collapsed. No! Rowan's anguished cry echoed through the hall. Without the moon priestess to maintain it, the Covenant could fail completely, rendering everything they'd suffered, everything they'd exposed, meaningless. Guards surged forward from the witness circle, weapons drawn, but Morrigan was already moving. She raised both hands and dark tendrils exploded outward, writhing shadows that caught the first wave of soldiers and flung them aside like children's toys. Bodies crashed into the crowd, sending nobles scrambling backward in panic. Did you think I spent decades as advisor to the throne without preparing for this moment? Morrigan's voice had transformed, from cultured sophistication to venomous rage. I've been accumulating power while you all grew soft and complacent. Forbidden texts, dark rituals, blood sacrifices from the very miners who discovered those precious moonstones in Wildhart territory. She spread her arms wide, and the shadows coalesced into something massive and terrible, a construct of pure dark magic that towered over the assembly like a nightmare made manifest. I built an empire in the shadows of this throne. I controlled trade routes, mining operation, land acquisitions, all while the great Alpha King signed whatever I placed before him without question. Kieran tried to move toward her, but his exhausted body refused to cooperate. Beside him, Rowan swayed on her feet, barely conscious from blood loss. They'd pushed themselves to the absolute limit in their duel, and now, when they were needed most, neither could fight effectively. More guards attacked, but Morrigan's dark magic met them with casual brutality. Shadow tendrils pierced armor, dark energy crackled through bodies, and wolves who'd survived countless battles fell screaming. The great hall descended into chaos as nobles fled toward the exits, trampling each other in their panic. "Where will you run?" Morrigan's laugh was unhinged, her carefully maintained sanity fracturing under the weight of her exposed crimes. "You've all seen too much. You'll all testify against me, so I'll solve that problem permanently." She began weaving another spell, this one larger, more terrible. The air itself grew thick and poisonous, shadows gathering above the hall like storm clouds pregnant with destruction. Whatever she was building, it was designed for mass slaughter. "I'll burn this entire summit to ash," she declared, her eyes wild with desperate rage. "Every witness, every noble, every wolf who saw my empire crumble. And when I'm done, I'll take the throne myself. The realm will believe the Alpha King died in a tragic attack, along with all his court. Who's left to say otherwise?" Declan struggled to his feet, blood running from his temple where debris had struck him. He grabbed a fallen sword and charged, roaring defiance. But Morrigan barely glanced at him. A casual gesture sent him flying backward, his body slamming into a stone pillar hard enough to crack it. The dark magic above them continued to build, swirling faster, growing darker. Morrigan was going to make good on her threat. She was going to kill everyone in this hall rather than face justice for her crimes. Kieran forced himself upright, sword trembling in his grip. Beside him, Rowan did the same, her face gray with blood loss, but her eyes burning with determination. They'd been enemies moments ago, locked in combat that should have ended with one of them dead. But now, facing this greater threat, they moved instinctively into position back to back. "Can you stand?" Kieran asked quietly. "Can you?" Rowan shot back, her curved blade rising despite her shaking arms. Around them, those guards still conscious were trying to regroup, but they were scattered, wounded, facing magic they had no defense against. The moon priestess lay motionless at the circle's edge, the Covenant's magic barely flickering without her to anchor it. Morrigan's spell reached its crescendo, the dark energy above them coalescing into something massive and deadly, a rain of shadow and death that would tear through flesh and stone alike. "Last words, Alpha King," Morrigan's voice dripped with poisonous triumph. "Any final commands before your 3-century reign ends in blood and failure?" Kieran met her mad gaze across the chaos-filled hall, felt Rowan's back pressed against his. Two warriors who'd tried to kill each other, now standing together against a threat neither could face alone, and made a choice that would define everything that came after. "Just one," he said, his voice carrying despite the chaos. "I was wrong about you, about all of it, and if I survive this, I'll spend the rest of my reign making it right." Then he charged forward, with Rowan matching his stride, two bleeding warriors against impossible odds and dark magic that could tear them both apart. But at least they'd face it standing. Kieran's charge toward Morrigan lasted 3 steps before the Covenant's magic seized him like an invisible fist closing around his chest. The ancient enchantment had been building throughout the Revelations, weighing truth against lies, justice against corruption, and now it rendered its verdict with the weight of centuries behind it. his legs buckled mid-stride. "No!" he gasped, fighting against the invisible force dragging him downward. His knees hit stone with a crack that echoed through the chaos-filled hall. "Not now. We have to stop her." But the Covenant didn't care about present threats. It cared about past truths, and the truth was undeniable. Kieran Nightshade, Alpha King, had presided over the massacre of innocents. He'd signed death warrants for children. He'd authorized the extinction of an entire bloodline based on fabricated evidence, never questioning, never investigating, never granting the accused even the dignity of answering their pleas. The magic pressed down harder, forcing his proud head to bow. Around him, the battle raged, guards fighting Morrigan's dark constructs, nobles screaming and fleeing, Rowan somewhere ahead, still trying to reach the traitor who'd orchestrated everything. But Kieran remained locked in place, his body refusing to obey his commands, the Covenant's judgment made manifest in his forced submission. "Get up!" Rowan's voice cut through the chaos, sharp with desperation. "Fight it! We need you!" "I can't," Kieran gritted out, shame burning hotter than any wound. 300 years of absolute authority, and now he knelt helpless while his kingdom fell apart around him. His sword slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering on blood-slicked stone. "The Covenant, it's judging me. Let it judge later," she snarled, somewhere in his peripheral vision, still fighting despite injuries that should have killed her. "People are dying now." But the magic wouldn't be denied. It forced him lower, his palms flat against ancient stone, his head bowing until he stared at his own reflection in pooled blood. And in that reflection, he saw not the mighty Alpha King, but a fool who'd been so confident in his own righteousness that he'd stopped questioning, stopped verifying, stopped doing the hard work of actual justice. Images flooded his mind, not his own memories, but ones the Covenant magic pulled from the very stones of this hall, from the blood spilled here, from the weight of truth finally acknowledged. He saw the Wildhart massacre through the eyes of the dying. A 7-year-old girl hiding in a cellar, her last thoughts of winter roses and the king who would surely save her. Twin boys fighting back to back, still believing their alpha would arrive. And stop this mistake. A father trying to surrender, begging for mercy for his children, cut down mid-plea. All of it done in Kieran's name, all of it authorized by his hand, all of it preventable if he'd just questioned, just investigated, just cared enough to look beyond the convenient intelligence reports. "I killed them," he whispered, the words torn from somewhere deep in his chest. "I killed them all." The Covenant's magic pulsed with terrible recognition, not punishment, but acknowledgement, truth spoken, justice recognized. The ancient enchantment didn't care that he hadn't known, that he'd been deceived, that his intentions had been pure. It cared only about outcome, innocent blood spilled under his authority, a righteous clan destroyed by his order, children murdered because he'd been too arrogant to verify. His shoulders shook, not from the magic's weight, but from genuine anguish finally allowed to surface. For 300 years, he'd prided himself on being just, on being fair, on being the kind of king who protected his people. And in one moment of lazy certainty, he'd become the thing he'd always despised, a tyrant who destroyed lives without proper investigation. Rowan was right, he breathed, his voice breaking. I didn't question, didn't investigate. I trusted Morrigan's word and signed away innocent lives like they meant nothing. Around him, Morrigan's dark magic swirled closer. He could hear her laughing, triumphant, as her spell reached its crescendo. In moments, that rain of shadow and death would fall, and everyone in this hall would die, including him, kneeling helpless, brought low not by an enemy's blade, but by the weight of his own failures. Part of him, the prideful part that had ruled for 3 centuries without bending, screamed to fight the Covenant's judgment, to rise, to prove his strength, to show that the Alpha King knelt for no one, not even ancient magic. But another part, quieter but growing stronger, whispered that maybe this was exactly what he deserved. Maybe justice demanded he remain here, forced to his knees, powerless to prevent the destruction his blindness had set in motion. Maybe this was karma made manifest. The Alpha King who authorized massacre, now helpless to prevent one. Please, he found himself whispering, though he didn't know if he spoke to the Covenant, to whatever gods watched over wolves, or to the ghosts of the Wildhart dead. Not like this. Let me stand. Let me fight. Let me do something right before. The Covenant's magic shifted, and suddenly the invisible weight crushing him down transformed into something else entirely. Not release, but choice. The ancient enchantment presented him with an option, wordless but crystal clear in its meaning. Accept the judgment. Acknowledge the injustice. Truly, genuinely accept responsibility for what was done in your name, not as words spoken for political survival, but as truth carved into your very soul. Or maintain your pride. Fight the magic. Refuse to yield even to righteous judgment, and remain frozen here, powerless, while everyone dies. Kieran's hands trembled against blood-slicked stone. Every instinct of 3 centuries screamed against submission. Alpha Kings didn't yield. Alpha Kings didn't kneel in defeat. Alpha Kings remained strong, unbreakable, absolute. But Rowan's words echoed in his memory. What threat was a 7-year-old child? Above him, Morrigan's spell reached critical mass. Seconds remained before it fell. Kieran closed his eyes, released the pride he'd carried for 300 years like armor, and spoke words that cost him everything. I yield to truth. I accept judgment. I was wrong, and if given the chance, I will spend the rest of my existence making it right. The Covenant's magic exploded through him like lightning, not painful, but transformative. The invisible weight vanished. Power flooded back into his limbs. And when Kieran Nightshade opened his eyes and rose from his knees, something fundamental had changed. He was still the Alpha King. But now he was also accountable. Rowan staggered back toward the challenge circle, her body screaming protests with every step, blood loss making the world swim in and out of focus. Morrigan's dark magic ravaged the hall around her, but through the chaos, she saw Kieran, the invincible Alpha King, kneeling on stone, with his head bowed, trapped by the Covenant's judgment. She should have felt triumph. This was what she'd come for, the king on his knees, forced to acknowledge the injustice he'd committed. Yet watching him there, shoulders shaking with genuine anguish rather than fear, his proud head bowed in remorse instead of submission, she felt something unexpected stir in her chest, not satisfaction, something more complicated. Her curved blade hung loose in her grip as she approached him, her footsteps unsteady. The Covenant's terms were clear. The fight continued until one yielded or died. And here he was, already defeated by truth rather than steel, already brought low by the weight of his failures. She raised her blade, the tip coming to rest against his exposed throat. One thrust, That's all it would take. End the Alpha King who'd authorized her family's slaughter. Complete her 5 years of preparation with a single, final strike. Do it! Kieran's voice was raw, stripped of authority. He didn't raise his head, didn't try to plead. If it brings you peace, if it's justice, do it. Rowan's hand trembled. The blade's edge pressed against his skin, a hair's breadth from drawing blood. She could see the pulse in his throat, rapid despite his apparent acceptance. He was afraid, not of death, but of dying without making amends. You didn't know, she found herself saying, the words bitter on her tongue. You trusted the wrong person. You failed to verify, but you didn't. You weren't the one who orchestrated it. Does that matter? He finally looked up, and his eyes held such raw guilt that it was almost physical. They died because of my signature, my authority, my failure to question. The blood is on my hands regardless of who lied to put it there. Behind them, Morrigan's spell swirled darker, building toward its devastating release. Guards were falling. The hall was collapsing into panic. They had seconds, maybe, before everyone died. I should kill you, Rowan whispered, but her blade didn't move. For my father, my mother, my sister who loved winter roses, my brothers who died believing in you. Yes, Kieran agreed simply. You should. The Covenant's magic pulsed between them, waiting, judging, holding its verdict in balance. And in that suspended moment, Rowan understood what it was waiting for. Not her choice, but his. Not whether she would kill him, but whether he would truly, genuinely accept responsibility. Then Morrigan's voice cut through the moment like poisoned glass. How touching. The rogue and the king, making peace while I destroy everything. Rowan's head snapped up. Morrigan stood at the far end of the hall, her hands raised, dark energy coalescing into a spear of pure shadow aimed directly at them. Not at the guards, not at the fleeing nobles, at her. At Rowan specifically, the witness who'd exposed everything. You should have died with your family 5 years ago, Morrigan snarled. Let me correct that mistake. She hurled the spell with all her accumulated power behind it. A lance of darkness that screamed through the air fast enough to tear stone, aimed straight at Rowan's heart. Rowan's exhausted body couldn't move fast enough. Her blade was at Kieran's throat, not in position to block. She was wounded, slow, helpless. Kieran moved. Still kneeling, still bound by the Covenant's judgment, he twisted and threw himself between Rowan and the attack. His body became her shield, his back taking the full force of Morrigan's dark magic. The impact drove him backward into Rowan, both of them crashing to the stone. Dark. Energy crackled across his armor, eating through metal, burning flesh, the corrupt magic trying to consume him from the inside out. He gasped in agony, but didn't scream. Even now, even dying, he maintained that iron control. No! Rowan scrambled out from under him, her hands going to his chest, where darkness spread like poison through his veins. Why would you? You didn't have to. Yes, he gritted out, his face gray with pain. I did. The Covenant's magic surged around them like a wave cresting. Kieran Nightshade had done something no one expected, something that completed his transformation from arrogant ruler to accountable king. He'd used his body to protect the woman whose family he'd destroyed. Not because the Covenant forced him, not because it was politically advantageous, but because it was right. "I yield," he said clearly, his voice carrying despite his pain. Not to Rowan's blade, not to the Covenant's magic, but to something deeper. "I yield to truth. I yield to justice. I yield to the responsibility I failed to uphold." He struggled to his knees again, even as dark magic aided him, even as his strength failed. With Rowan's help, he rose just enough to face the assembled witnesses, those who remained, those who'd seen everything. "I, Kieran Nightshade, Alpha King, acknowledge before all present that I authorized the destruction of House Wildhart based on false intelligence." His voice grew stronger despite his wounds, carrying to every corner of the hall. "I failed to verify, failed to investigate, failed to grant them even the dignity of answering their pleas. Their blood is on my hands, and I accept full responsibility." The Covenant's magic blazed brilliant silver, recognizing truth spoken without reservation, responsibility accepted without excuse. The ancient enchantment that had forced him to his knees now released him, not because he'd won, but because he genuinely yielded to justice. Around them, the surviving wolves stood, frozen, witnessing something unprecedented. Their invincible Alpha King on his knees, publicly accepting blame for atrocity. Rowan knelt beside him, her blade forgotten, her hands trying uselessly to stem the dark magic corrupting his wounds. "You're dying." "Probably," he agreed, with a ghost of that predator's smile. "But if this is how I pay for what I did to your family, then it's a light price." "No," she said fiercely, surprised by the vehemence in her own voice. "You don't get to die and escape responsibility. You said you'd make it right, so live, stand up, and help me kill the one actually responsible." She offered her hand, the same hand that had held a blade to his throat moments ago. Kieran looked at it, then at her face, seeing perhaps for the first time not the enemy who'd challenged him, but the warrior who'd forced him to become better. He took her hand, and together, the Alpha King who'd learned accountability and the warrior who'd taught him rose to face the true enemy. The Covenant's silver light blazed brighter as Kieran accepted Rowan's hand, the ancient magic recognizing their alliance not as defeat, but as transformation. The moment their hands clasped, power surged through both of them, not dark like Morrigan's corruption, but clean and bright, the Covenant lending its strength to those who'd honored truth. Kieran rose, dark magic still eating at his wounds, but the Covenant's energy holding the corruption at bay. Beside him, Rowan stood straighter despite her blood loss, the ancient enchantment sustaining them both for what came next. They turned as one to face Morrigan, who'd frozen mid-casting, her mad eyes widening as she realized what she was seeing. "Impossible," she breathed. "The Covenant should have destroyed you. You lost. You yielded." "I yielded to justice," Kieran said, his voice resonating with borrowed power. "Not to defeat. There's a difference." "Together," Rowan added, her curved blade rising despite her trembling arm. "We order your capture, Morrigan Darkwood, for treason, for murder, for corruption of the throne." "You can't order anything," Morrigan shrieked, her composure completely shattered. "You're just a rogue, a remnant, a—" "She is the rightful voice of House Wildhart," Kieran interrupted, his authority returning but tempered now with something it had lacked before: humility. Witness to injustice, challenger who exposed corruption, and by the Covenant's law, victor of this trial. He turned to the surviving guards, many of whom were struggling to their feet, weapons ready despite their wounds. "Captain Steelclaw, take Lady Morrigan into custody. Use iron chains. She's corrupted herself with dark magic that ordinary bonds won't hold." "My king," the guard captain saluted, relief evident in his voice at hearing clear commands after such chaos. Morrigan gathered dark energy for one final desperate attack, but she'd expended too much power, and the Covenant's magic still blazed around, Kieran and Rowan like protective armor. Her spell dissipated against it like smoke against wind. Guards swarmed her position, iron chains wrapping around her wrists, nullifying her ability to channel magic. "You'll regret this," she screamed as they dragged her toward the hall's entrance. "All of you. I made this kingdom wealthy. I controlled territories worth fortunes. Without me, you're nothing but—" "Without you," Declan's voice rang out as the beta limped forward, bloodied but alive. "We're finally free, to be honest." The guards hauled Morrigan away, her screams echoing until the heavy doors slammed shut. Silence fell over the great hall, or what remained of it. Bodies lay scattered among overturned tables and shattered stone. The moon priestess was being tended by healers, her breathing shallow but steady. Survivors clustered in shocked groups, trying to process everything they'd witnessed. Kieran turned to face them all, still kneeling in the center of the challenge circle, not because the Covenant forced him anymore, but because it felt right to address them from this position of acknowledged failure. "I owe House Wildhart a debt that can never be fully repaid," he began, his voice carrying despite his wounds. "But I will start here, now, before all of you as witnesses." He looked at Rowan. "Rowan Wildhart, last daughter of your house. What are your demands?" She limped to stand before him, and for a moment the image crystallized. The warrior standing, the king kneeling, roles reversed from how this night began. Full restoration of Wildhart territories and titles, complete investigation into all land transfers and political decisions made during Morrigan's tenure, public memorial for those killed in the massacre, and justice, real justice, for the fallen. "Granted," Kieran said, without hesitation. "All of it. I swear before these witnesses and the Covenant's magic that your house will be restored, the conspiracy fully exposed, and your family's memory honored." Rowan nodded, but something flickered across her face. Not satisfaction, but consideration, as if she were making a decision that surprised even her. "There's one more thing. Something not for my house, but for the kingdom." The assembled wolves leaned forward, curious. Even Kieran looked uncertain. "This can't happen again," Rowan said firmly. "No king should have such unchecked power that corruption can flourish in their shadow. No ruler should be so isolated that they stop questioning, stop verifying, stop doing the hard work of actual justice." She took a breath. "I propose the creation of a new position. Royal Challenger, someone with authority to question the king's decisions, to demand evidence, to investigate claims. Someone who stands outside the normal hierarchy, but with power to check even the throne." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Shock, intrigue, concern. Such a position had never existed. It would fundamentally alter the power structure of the kingdom. "And who," Kieran asked quietly, "would hold this position?" "Someone who's already proven they're willing to challenge you." Rowan met his gaze steadily. "Someone who has no political ambitions but a fierce commitment to justice. Someone who—" She hesitated, then finished. "Someone you've given reason to never trust blindly, but also reason to believe you can change. Understanding dawned in Kieran's eyes. If you'll have me, not as a subject, not as someone beneath you, but as, she searched for the right word, a partner in ensuring this kingdom stays honest. The hall held its breath. No Alpha King had ever accepted such limitation to their power. It went against every instinct of dominance and control. Kieran looked at her. This warrior who'd invaded his feast, challenged him to combat, exposed his greatest failure, and somehow, impossibly, given him the chance to become better. Then he did something no one expected. He extended his hand to her, not commanding her to kneel, not offering patronizing forgiveness, but reaching up from his kneeling position to offer partnership between equals. "I accept," he said simply. "Rowan Wildhart, royal challenger, partner in reform. Rise with me." She took his hand, and together they stood, no longer enemies, no longer challenger and challenged, but two wolves who'd fought each other to the point of transformation and emerged as allies. The Covenant's magic pulsed one final time, then dissolved like morning mist, its work complete. Truth revealed, justice acknowledged, balance restored. And in the ruins of the Great Hall, before 600 witnesses, the Alpha King and the Royal Challenger stood side by side, forging not just a new alliance, but a new way forward.